WildMane uploads specially curated BL stories daily. Subscribe for more BL stories and comment what type of story you want next. The Empire had been singing his praises for 7 straight days. General Kang Jiheon had returned from war. He came back a hero, he came back a conqueror, and he came back absolutely covered in blood. The metallic scent of the battlefield clung to his heavy military uniform, creating this dark, suffocating contrast to the cheering crowds who were showering him with bright petals. He rode through the capital gates like a god of war, his face carved from ice, his posture rigid and unforgiving. But you see, the terrifying truth of the battlefield is that the blood you carry back is rarely your own. The Northern Rebellion had completely collapsed beneath the relentless march of his army. Before he had even turned 29, this terrifyingly handsome, dominant alpha had brought an entire region to its knees. But as he stood silently during those endless, glittering victory banquets, he didn't look like a victor. As the nobles surrounded him, acting like scavengers, desperate for just a sliver of his attention, hungry for power and the chance to bind their delicate bloodlines to his, the general only felt a deep, hollow disgust. Beneath that iron posture and all the medals pinned to his chest, he was utterly, completely exhausted. And it wasn't a physical exhaustion. His body was a weapon forged in iron and war, capable of withstanding unimaginable punishment. No, it was his soul that was bleeding out. He looked at the room full of calculating, hungry eyes and saw nothing but threats, especially the Omegas. It wasn't that he desired them. It was exactly the opposite. He ruthlessly avoided them. In Jiheon's violent world, a pretty smile was just a mask for political ambition. Their sudden, cloying heats were calculated traps designed to ensnare him. So he built an impenetrable fortress around himself. He was cold, untouchable. His own dominant alpha pheromones were sharp, heavy, and uninviting, keeping absolutely everyone isolated from the broken man beneath the armor. Which is exactly why the entire Grand Hall froze when the untouchable general suddenly collapsed. The sound of his heavy glass goblet shattering against the pristine marble floor echoed through the dead silence, literally like a gunshot. A split second later, Jiheon's massive, heavily muscled frame hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood began spreading almost instantly from his lips, soaking the dark, heavy fabric of his gold-embroidered military uniform. It was poison. The banquet erupted into a wave of pure, suffocating chaos. The emperor was violently on his feet, screaming for the royal physicians over the blind, stampeding panic of the nobles. But for Jiheon, the screaming was already fading into a distant, dull roar. His vision blurred, giving way to the cold, pulling shadows of death. And then a single word cut through the suffocating panic of 100 shouting alphas. Move. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a barked military command from a seasoned soldier. It was a calm, gentle, but utterly unyielding voice. And somehow, in a grand hall overflowing with dominant, panicking alphas, everyone fell instantly silent. The chaotic crowd parted as if pushed by an unseen force. Jiheon, desperately fighting the darkness pulling him under, forced his heavy eyes open just a fraction. He saw soft brown hair, simple, unadorned helirobes. The young Omega dropped to his knees beside the bleeding general. This was Yoon Seorin. In a room paralyzed by overwhelming panic, Sorin's hands were perfectly, miraculously steady as he pressed delicate fingers against the massive alpha's throat. His fearless brown eyes scanned the general, diagnosing him coolly with a rare northern venom. When the panicked emperor demanded to know if the general could be saved, Sorin simply looked down at the dying man in silence for a heartbeat. Then he calmly answered, "Yes." Part 1. Sanctuary in Lavender. When Jiheon finally clawed his way out of the suffocating, agonizing darkness, the heavy metallic smell of blood and fear was entirely gone. The freezing, unforgiving marble of the palace was gone. He woke to the soft, flickering warmth of candlelight dancing against wooden walls. Outside, rain tapped a gentle, rhythmic lullaby against the glass panes. And the air was entirely different. He took a slow, labored breath, his chest aching. It smelled of crushed sweet herbs, fresh rain on cobblestone, and lavender. It was a soft, pure omega scent, entirely free of any calculated manipulative pheromones. It enveloped him like a heavy, warm blanket against the freezing cold of his nightmares. For the very first time in years, the general's hypervigilant, war-torn instincts whispered a single, foreign word: safe. A soft voice broke the silence, telling him he was awake. Jiheon's predatory instincts flared instantly at the sudden sound. Pain exploded in his chest as he tried to violently sit up, but strong, unexpectedly careful hands pressed him back down against the mattress, gently warning him not to move. The touch was far too gentle. Jiheon's hand lashed out blindly, his massive, calloused fingers wrapping around the Omega's slender wrist in a crushing vice grip. He demanded to know who he was, his voice a low, aggressive rumble that vibrated through the small room. When Seorin calmly introduced himself, Jiheon sneered. An Omega. Treating a dominant alpha general alone and unguarded? It was absurd. It was dangerous. Seorin quietly told him he had almost died, completely ignoring the painful grip on his wrist. Jiheon slowly released him, his voice dripping with bitter hostility as he muttered that it was unfortunate. But Seorin didn't flinch. He didn't cower under the crushing weight of the alpha's dark aura. Instead, he just blinked once and laughed softly. That quiet, genuinely brave sound startled the dangerous alpha more than the poison ever could. The recovery process was agonizing for a man who utterly despised the concept of weakness. In those early days, Jiheon fought absolutely everything. He fought the forced bed rest, he fought the bitter herbal medicine, he fought the infuriating quiet of the sanctuary. He demanded to return to his military work, while Seorin demanded he rest. When Jiheon glared with the exact same terrifying dominant intensity that had made entire enemy armies surrender, Seorin simply placed the medicine bowl down, offered a gentle, unfazed smile, and ignored his pasturing entirely. It was maddening. And yet, as the long, rain-soaked days stretched on in the healer's private residence, the heavy silence between them began to undeniably shift. Jiheon's bitter hostility slowly melted into something else. Without even realizing it, the fearsome general found himself waiting for the soft sound of Seorin's footsteps on the wooden floorboards, waiting for the calming, sweet scent of lavender to enter the room. The peace felt dangerous to him, but he found he couldn't push it away. The absolute turning point came in the dead of night. Jiheon woke up thrashing, suffocating on a vivid, horrifying nightmare of screaming soldiers, burning flesh, and unending blood. His massive chest heaved, a low growl tearing from his throat. His alpha instincts were wild, dominant, and violently defensive, ready to tear apart whatever threat was in the room. And then, the heavy, soothing scent of lavender wrapped around his panicked senses. Seorin was sitting right beside the bed. He wasn't restraining the thrashing alpha. He wasn't crowding him with fearful, submissive pheromones. He was just there, a quiet, unshakable anchor in a raging storm of trauma. He whispered softly into the dark, telling the alpha that he was home. The word struck Jiheon like a physical blow to the chest. His frantic breathing slowed. The wild, violent instincts steadied instantly under the warm, profound weight of that simple, impossible word. Seorin stayed right there until the violent tremors racking the general's massive body completely stopped. The silence in the room was incredibly heavy, thick with the unsaid horrors of the brutal war Jiheon had brought back with him. Then, breaking the stillness, Seorin told him softly that he didn't have to survive alone all the time. His voice was full of an emotional intelligence that saw right through the general's impenetrable armor. Those gentle, quiet words did what no enemy army ever could. They shattered the painful, ironclad walls inside the alpha's chest. For the first time in his entire blood-soaked life, someone had looked past the terrifying, lethal monster of the battlefield and saw the exhausted, broken man beneath. Part 2. The Possessive Instinct. When Jiheon finally returned to the imperial palace, the whispers among the court scavengers started almost immediately. They noticed the shift. The alpha general was less violent, calmer, but dangerously distracted. He began abruptly walking out of vital imperial meetings early, rushing into the night, desperate to return to a simple Omega healer. The true depth of this possessive shift was terrifyingly realized when rut season hit. For a dominant alpha like Jiheon, a rut was usually an absolute nightmare, a violent, painful, blinding haze of pure, destructive aggression that required heavy, dangerous chemical suppressants just to survive. He locked himself away, burning up with a violent fever, his jaw clenched in pure agony. But the moment Seorin defied the royal guards and simply stepped foot into the locked room, the blinding aggression completely vanished. The violent fever broke into a deep, desperate need for comfort. The dangerous alpha was instantly tamed simply by breathing in his heavy lavender scent. Jiheon growled through his clenched teeth, his body trembling, demanding that the Omega leave. He was terrified of his own overpowering instincts, terrified of hurting the fragile Omega who had willingly walked into the lion's den. But Seorin just stopped in the center of the room. He quietly told the alpha that he didn't mean that. He stepped closer, seeing past the dangerous, warning growl to the immense, crushing biological pain beneath. He gently asked how long the general had been hurting like this. The soft question broke whatever fragile resistance Jiheon had left. He let out a dark, bitter laugh, dropping his heavy head into his hands, and confessed that it had been since the war. His voice was gravelly, raw, and completely stripped of his usual pride. Seorin's expression softened into something painfully tender. He reached out and pressed a cool, gentle hand against Jiheon's burning forehead. It wasn't a calculated, manipulative touch. It was just pure, unconditional warmth. As Seorin's gentle touch slowly cooled the feral fever raging in his blood, Jiheon was struck by a terrifying realization. The soothing Lavender, the quiet, brave voice, the fearless brown eyes that looked at him like he was just a man. Yoon Seorin was becoming the only place in the entire world that felt safe. He was his sanctuary. But there is a dark, dangerous truth about powerful, dominant alphas. When they have spent their entire lives isolated, hypervigilant, and violently protective, and they finally find the one single thing they actually love, their instincts shift completely. They become absolutely, terrifyingly lethal about it. Months later, the grand winter festival arrived, wrapping the capital in soft falling snow and the warm golden glow of thousands of lantern lights. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, walking through the crowded, joyful streets with Seorin at his side, Jiheon felt something resembling genuine peace. Seorin was smiling softly at the lights, his breath pluming in the freezing air, his lavender scent sweet, relaxed, and entirely trusting. But an alpha bred for war is never truly off the battlefield. In a fraction of a second, the peaceful winter air shifted. Jiheon's predatory instincts flared violently, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Before he even saw the hidden threat in the shadows, he smelled it, the sharp, bitter, metallic scent of blood, intent on murder. With blinding, inhuman speed, Jiheon violently yanked Seorin against his massive, armored chest. Crack. An assassin's arrow sliced through the exact empty space where the Omega's heart had just been, burying itself deep into the stone wall behind them with a sickening thud. Screams erupted. Pure chaos tore through the festive crowd. But Jiheon didn't hear the panic. He only felt Seorin trembling against his chest. Real fear from his Omega. In that exact instant, Jiheon's iron controls snapped completely. A suffocating wave of violently dominant, pitch-black alpha pheromones crashed through the entire street like a physical shockwave. Every other alpha within a mile dropped to their knees, frozen in pure biological terror as the atmosphere turned deadly. The hidden assassin realized his fatal mistake way too late and scrambled frantically across the snowy rooftops. Jiheon's eyes had gone pitch black with predatory fury, his inner beast completely unchained and demanding blood. He carefully, almost reverently, handed the trembling Omega into the protective arms of his elite royal guards. He didn't shout, he didn't raise his voice over the screaming crowd. He delivered a single, terrifyingly calm command that sent absolute shivers down the spines of hardened soldiers. Protect him. And with that, the lethal Alpha General vanished into the blinding snowstorm to hunt. Part 3. Only safe with him. They found the assassin's broken body near the frozen river just before dawn. It was a brutal, merciless message written in blood and ice. Overnight, the entire empire came to a silent, collective realization. The gentle Omega healer was the Alpha General's sanctuary, and he was utterly, completely untouchable. Late that night, as heavy snow continued to blanket the silent palace, Seorin found Jiheon standing alone in the dark, freezing courtyard. The Alpha's gloves were heavily stained with fresh blood. The terrifying monster of the battlefield had returned. But Seorin didn't run. He walked quietly toward the towering, blood-stained man. He stopped a few feet away and softly stated that he had killed him. Jiheon replied with a simple yes. His voice was entirely devoid of hesitation or remorse. But underneath the coldness, Seorin could hear a heavy, crushing exhaustion. Seorin looked up at the fearsome Alpha, his perceptive eyes tracing the tight, painful tension in the general's jawline. He whispered softly, telling the general that he was scared. Jiheon completely froze, his breath hitched visibly in the freezing air, because it was the absolute truth. The violent explosion of alpha pheromones, the brutal, merciless execution on the ice, it wasn't driven by rage. It wasn't an alpha's bruised pride. It was fear, pure, paralyzing, unadulterated terror at the thought of losing the only light he had found in his pitch-dark world. Jiheon looked away, unable to meet the Omega's eyes, and admitted with a cracking voice that he had buried too many people already. Seorin felt his own chest ache at the raw, unguarded agony in the dominant Alpha's voice. Slowly, deliberately, the quietly brave Omega closed the remaining distance between them. He reached up, his bare, warm fingers brushing the freezing snowflakes from Jiheon's dark, wind-blown hair, completely ignoring the blood staining the man's armor. The massive, dangerous Alpha went perfectly still beneath the delicate, healing touch. Seorin murmured, letting his soothing lavender scent wash over them both, telling him once again that he didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Jiheon closed his eyes. The gentle words seemed to physically tear through his chest, finally breaking the very last remaining shards of iron armor he wore over his heart. Suddenly, Jiheon reached up and caught Seorin's hand, his massive, blood-stained fingers wrapped carefully, almost reverently, around the Omega's delicate ones. It wasn't a rough grip. It wasn't the dominant, possessive claim of an alpha. It was desperate. When the general finally opened his eyes and looked down at the healer, the absolute, bare vulnerability in his dark gaze was devastating. He begged the Omega to stay beside him. It wasn't an order from a commanding general. It was a whispered plea from a lonely, exhausted man who had finally, truly found his home. Looking up at the most feared alpha in the entire empire, a man who had conquered nations with an iron fist, but now looked entirely fragile just holding his hand, Seorin's heartbeat softened. The walls had completely fallen, and in the quiet, profound intimacy of the falling snow, surrounded by the sweet scent of lavender and the freezing winter air, Yoon Seorin silently vowed that he would never, ever leave him behind. WildMane uploads specially curated BL stories daily. Subscribe for more BL stories and comment what type of story you want next.